Okay, if you've ever dealt with chronic constipation, you have definitely heard the same old advice over and over again. But what if that advice just doesn't cut it? Well, today we're going way beyond those generic tips. We are diving into brand new evidence-based guidelines that offer specific, actionable solutions that you can actually use. You've heard it right. Just eat more fiber, drink more water. And it's honestly frustrating advice because for tens of millions of people, it's just not enough to solve the problem. It's so vague, and when it doesn't work, it can really feel like you're completely out of options. But that is all changing. For the first time, we have a set of expert guidelines that really cut through all that noise. And they're not just opinions, they're based on a super rigorous review of scientific trials. And they give us clear, specific recommendations on what actually, truly helps. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get a handle on just how big this problem is. Then, we'll look at how these new guidelines were created. We'll get into the specific food fixes and supplements that actually made the cut based on hard evidence. And finally, we'll talk about why this is such a meaningful upgrade for everyone's health. All right, first up, just how big of an issue are we talking about here? Let me tell you, it's so much more than just an occasional inconvenience. For a lot of people, it's a chronic condition that can seriously impact their quality of life. The numbers are pretty staggering, actually. In the United States alone, chronic constipation affects up to 20% of all adults. Think about that. That's 1 in every 5 people. It's an incredibly common and, frankly, undertreated condition. And we're not just talking about being a little irregular. The official symptoms include things like infrequent movements in having real difficulty or needing to strain when you do go. And if it's left unmanaged, it can lead to some more serious health issues, like hemorrhoids or even fecal impaction. So, with such a widespread problem, how do we find answers we can actually rely on? Well, let's look at these new guidelines from the British Dietetic Association, because they are a total game changer. Now, this wasn't just a few experts sharing their thoughts in a room. The process behind this was incredibly rigorous. Researchers analyzed 75 high-quality clinical trials. They rated the evidence using a standardized system called GRADE, which is basically the gold standard for this stuff. Then, a whole committee of gastroenterologists and dietitians voted. And get this, a recommendation only made it into the final guidelines if it had at least 85% agreement. That is a really high bar for scientific consensus. And what came out of that tough process was some incredibly specific advice. So let's get into the core of it, the evidence-backed food fixes that are actually proven to work. First on the list, and this might be a little bit of a surprise for some, is Kiwifruit. Yup, not just eat more fruit in general, but this specific one really stood out in the research. What's so fascinating here is the level of detail. The recommendation is to eat 2 to 3 kiwi fruit every single day for at least 4 weeks to see a real effect. The science suggests this works because kiwi has this amazing 1-2 punch of high fiber and a unique enzyme called actinidin, which actually helps with digestion. Okay, next up, we have another one that's super specific. It's not just about drinking more water. It's about drinking a certain type of water. The guidelines recommend drinking between half a liter and 1.5 liters of high mineral content water every day. So what's so special about it? Well, it's rich in magnesium and sulfate, and these work by drawing more water into the intestines. This helps soften things up and makes them easier to pass. The third food that made the cut is rye bread. Now, this one is pretty well known for its high fiber content, but the recommendation that came out of the research, well, it presents a bit of a practical challenge for most people. So here's the thing, it's all about the dosage. The evidence showed benefits from eating 6 to 8 slices of rye bread per day for at least 3 weeks. Now, yeah, that is a lot of bread, but the researchers found this high dose was what it took to get a significant increase in stool frequency. They even noted that this might be pretty tough for some people to stick with. Okay, so the review didn't just look at food. It also checked out a bunch of supplements. Let's see which non-food item was so good that it got a strong recommendation based on the evidence. Magnesium oxide was the clear winner here. It was found to be really effective at increasing stool frequency and improving consistency. You know, it works in a similar way to that mineral water, by drawing water into the intestines. The recommended dose is between 0.5 gram and 1.5 grams daily, taken for at least 4 weeks. It's also really important to talk about what didn't have strong evidence. The researchers found that two very common remedies, probiotics and senna supplements, actually had pretty limited evidence to back them up for chronic constipation in this specific rigorous review. Now, this doesn't mean they don't work for anybody, but it means the evidence from those high-quality trials just wasn't strong enough to make a general recommendation. So why is this collection of specific advice so important? What makes these guidelines a true upgrade for both patients and doctors? Let's talk about that. This right here is the key difference. We're finally moving away from vague, unhelpful advice like eat more fiber to precise, actionable instructions like eat 2 kiwis per day for 4 weeks. This gives people a clear plan they can follow and track instead of just, guessing. And experts who weren't even involved in the research totally agree. Dr. Supriya Rao points out that these guidelines finally separate what is scientifically proven to help from what's just tradition. They give clear instructions on how long to try something and when to move on if it isn't working for you. And Dr. Rubini Wijitalaka echoes this, saying that these food-specific, research-backed recommendations will empower clinicians to offer targeted advice instead of just falling back on those generic fiber tips. It completely changes the conversation around managing this really common condition. So the takeaway is really clear. We now have a roadmap that's based on solid evidence, not just old habits or tradition. It provides specific strategies, specific doses, and specific timelines. The only question left is, with this clear evidence in your hands, which strategy will you try first?